Since almost the dawn of film, filmmakers have been using background replacement in their work. A simple way to transport an audience and create vivid imagery. But there are myriad ways to replace a background. How have they developed, and what does this mean for said filmmakers? In this video I say that's what I aim to find out. To what extent has the development allowed filmmakers to use VFX in their work, and what does the future hold for these techniques? The techniques I'll be discussing vary wildly in skill, cost, and accessibility. So let's get into it. How do you replace a background? Arguably the first form of background replacement, matte painting is a technique in which a painting, photograph, or digital image is used to augment a shot. First used in 1907 by director Norman Dorn in Missions of California, the technique was used to artificially restore the roofs of some of the titular missions that were sadly damaged. This was done using a version of the technique called the glass shot, in which the camera is placed behind a glass pane on which the roofs were painted, giving the impression of a fully restored building. Dorn wasn't done innovating though. In 1911, he pioneered another form of this technique, often called the original negative matte painting method. Closer to double exposure, he wouldn't expose certain parts of the image. These would then be filled in by a painter after the shoot, allowing for more detailed and accurate paintings. Now, how practical is this technique for filmmakers in the 21st century? From my research, it seems pretty practical. With knowledge of modern compositing tools like Nuke, matte painting artists are able to create highly detailed matte paintings using digital imagery rather than just paint. It's arguable that it's never been easier to use matte painting. The next innovation in background replacement came once again from the mind of Norman Dorn. He developed the idea of projection in 1913, however due to technical limitations at the time, it wasn't able to be used until 1934's Lilium by Fritz Lang. Rear projection places the projector behind a translucent sheet, shining through it and being picked up by the camera on the other side, whereas front projection projects the image backwards onto an opaque wall. The most common use of this technique is undoubtedly car scenes, giving the impression of a moving vehicle, for example in James Bond's Dr. No. However, this technique isn't just reserved for high-end blockbusters, it is also used in sitcoms as well, showing just how reliable this technique is. Despite this, there has always been something off about the look of projection, which has been used to the advantage of directors over the years. Films like The Matrix and Eyes Wide Shut use this technique to create a sense of unease for audiences. So how does this shape up in the modern landscape of background replacement? Well, as previously mentioned, it's a very reliable technique, only requiring a simple setup and taking the pressure off post-production. The main issues we run into with this technique is the general lack of flexibility, requiring a pre-filmed plate, as well as a potential lower quality look to the shot. Not impossible to overcome, but things to consider when using this technique. Without a shadow of a doubt, the most common form of background replacement, green screen is the effect you're most likely to have heard of. It involves filming actors against an evenly lit green wall, which is then used to key out the subject and put them where the scene requires. Widely understood to be first used in the 1940 film The Thief of Baghdad, the process originally involved filming actors against a blue screen, using a filter to cut the blues from the shot. With the background keyed out, the characters could then be placed in front of a background plate, creating the finished look. The quality of these mattes weren't perfect though, often leaving the characters or objects semi-transparent, with lines around them where the matte didn't match up perfectly. The process of keying became far easier in the 1980s when computer image processing came into its own. Now the green screen plates could be edited quickly in post-production without the need for filtered footage. As computers and cameras have developed, so has the quality of this shot, leading to more accurate color separation and higher detail. In terms of accessibility for modern filmmakers, this takes the #1 spot. Only requiring a solidly blue or green surface and an editing software, all of which have chroma keying, the barrier to entry is on the floor, leading this to be a very accessible form of background replacement for filmmakers. Developed by Disney at some point in the mid-20th century, the sodium vapor process is closely related to chroma keying, using a prism to key out the orange tones of the sodium vapor lights, the ones used in street lamps. The outstanding factor with this technique is its use of light, allowing the matte to be translucent and as detailed as needed. The best known example of this is the 1964 film adaptation of Mary Poppins during the chalk drawing scene. In this scene, Mary is wearing a mesh veil that is keyed out perfectly in a way that using green screen today would be almost impossible to replicate. Now here you ask, if the technique is so good, why don't we see more films using it? Well, annoyingly, Disney in fact lost the prism, with the last known film to use it being Dick Tracy in 1990. All hope is not lost though, as Nico Pueringer of Corridor Digital and Paul DeBevick of Eyeline Studios have attempted to recreate this technique. Documenting their attempts in a 2024 Corridor Crew video, the team showed comparisons of a character shot on green screen as well as using the sodium vapor process. The The results were remarkable, pulling a perfect key, taking into account movement, colour, and translucency, in effect bringing the technique back from the dead. Obviously in the many years it's been lost, there hasn't been much development, but its replication shows the possibility of its return. That being said, the prism is currently very rare to come across, making it basically impossible for most filmmakers to use this technique. Potentially in the future this could come back, but for now it may stay dead for a few more years. Most notably used in The Mandalorian, virtual production has created waves in the VFX industry and is totally reshaping how some production houses operate. Arguably a development of rear projection, virtual production is a technique in which a virtual set is displayed on a large LED wall behind a physical set. Often referred to as a volume, these LED walls display imagery of the virtual set, similarly to projection, yet with one key difference. The camera is tracked to a virtual camera that mirrors its motion exactly. VP's in-camera nature is another major benefit of this technique. Capturing a mostly finished shot on set significantly cuts down on post-production time. Additionally, the real-time nature of the game's engines that volumes run on allow for adjustments to be made on the fly, helping directors get the shot they want and saving VFX artists from the looming threat of a reshoot crunch. Virtual production is also very scalable. A TV or green screen can be used instead of a volume, and even the tracking system can be replaced by VR hand controllers. This scalability arguably makes VP one of the most accessible forms of background replacement. Whilst it does require knowledge of games engines like Unreal Engine, it can be used at almost any budget, making it very accessible for modern-day filmmakers. Researching this shows that background replacement is an ever-changing form of VFX with a detailed history. From the earliest days of innovators like Norman Doane up to the bleeding edge of virtual production, it's become far easier for your average filmmaker to transport audiences. The industry is already shifting towards real-time VFX like virtual production, and experts expect this to continue. As studios begin to get their heads around this technology, as it appears that they are doing, experts predict that virtual production will revolutionize the way that films are being made. There is also a trend of AI creeping its way into the industry, with many artists fearing for their jobs as studios look to cut costs. Despite this, I see a bright future, one in which artists flourish using modern techniques, creating visually stunning work, and bringing production into a new golden age.